Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Casual Criminalist. Today, Chandler Halderson, how Snapchat caught a serial killer. Sorry, not a serial killer, just a regular killer. Don't know why I inserted serial killer there. If it's in the title, that's for clicks, and probably a mistake. Anyway, Wham's here. Danny writes me a script. I've never read it before. You and I, dear audience, are going to explore it together. So let us jump in, shall we? On the 8th of July, 2021, a young man from Wisconsin by the name of Chandler Halderson went knocking on the doors of his neighbors to ask if anyone had seen his mum and dad lately. The 23-year-old hadn't. Oh, good. At least he's old. I was like, if he's 15, this is a whole lot darker. It's like, where's my mum? But he's 23. So it's less bad, although I get the feeling it's going to be bad. Anyway, the 23-year-old hadn't heard from Bart and Krista Halderson for the best part of a week, not since they'd set off with friends to spend a few days in their family cabin in Langlade County. And now, the usually laid-back Chandler almost looked as if he was beginning to get a bit concerned about their whereabouts. He would have a lot more to feel concerned about the very next day, when he found himself fielding questions from the police during an interrogation which shifted gear quite dramatically when a particularly grisly discovery was made elsewhere, as Chandler was still droning on to the police about how much his dad liked green egg grills. Alright, it's a bit of a random one. You know what, Chandler? My dad too. My dad loves that green egg grill. Every time I go back to see my parents, he's always out there just doing something on that green egg grill. Always. The case that unfolded over the course of the next year was the story of how a popular and easily-going family met an utterly barbaric fate for the flimsiest and most baffling of reasons. The story of how a bright man with no criminal history and good prospects attempted to cover his tracks in a manner which suggested that he was a complete idiot. The story of a darkly mesmerizing 8-week trial in which it was difficult to even remotely comprehend the revolting actions of a contender for the world's laziest criminal. I'm going to enjoy this. I mean, I'm not going to enjoy all the blood and guts, because that's not really why I like these, but I do like it when criminals get busted for being stupid. That brings me such joy. And it's the story of how the combination of a deeply distrustful relationship and a handy Snapchat feature helped to piece together certain vital pieces of a preposterous puzzle, which is still missing some pieces that may never be found. Snapchat feature. I don't know. Wait. Was this called Snapchat? Oh, for some reason Snapchat and Instagram I get confused. They're two things that I don't really use. I've never used Snapchat. Instagram, I have an account, don't really use it. But Snapchat, I thought that was when you send a photo to someone and then it would disappear. But now I know there's Snapchat shows and stuff. Snapchat wanted me to do one of these. It was a while ago. It's like a couple of years ago. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. It sounds stupid. And then people were making so much money from their Snapchat shows. I was like, God damn it! Rocky Man. I think we can take it for granted that the holiday in the family cabin isn't likely to end particularly well for the missing Bart and Krista Halderson. And I suspect that this is going to develop into a tale of tragedy for what appeared to be such a close-knit and highly motivated family who were doing pretty well for themselves and were widely known as thoroughly decent human beings with spotless reputations, exactly the sort of neighbors that you'd love to have living next door to you instead of that miserable old sod who keeps calling around to complain whenever you're burning household waste in the backyard. Danny, stop that. You shouldn't be burning household waste in the backyard. I'm currently being not a good neighbor because our garden is just an absolute train wreck because it's being redone, and we have a pear tree in the garden which has it has so many pears and they all drop on the ground, and it's really hard to go and pick them up because there's so many, and it's so muddy because there's no grass, and there's just like these rotting pears, and I'm like, we should have someone in to come and get rid of them, but we haven't done that yet, so it just smells bad. I'm a bad neighbor. Bart and Krista Halderson hooked up in the 90s when they both worked together in the same department store. They married in 1994, settling down in a beautiful home in the quiet village of Windsor in Dane County, Wisconsin. Bart was a petrolhead who spent many years working as a customer service representative for an auto body shop before moving on to becoming an accountant for a big international firm. Whilst Krista gave up her job following the birth of her first son, Mitchell, in 1994 to become a stay-at-home mum for a while. The younger son, Chandler, came along in 1996, and when he'd grown up enough to sort out his own breakfast, Krista eventually returned to work as an administrative assistant for an automotive company. Both Bart and Krista were often described as utterly devoted parents, and Bart regularly got involved in his young children's activities and hobbies, even taking the step of becoming a scout den leader. Yeah, I like doing this. I really did think it's something that I'd like to do. I really thought like, oh God, I have to go watch like my kids perform in school and all of this stuff. And now it's like, yeah, 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. I'll just leave work and come and do that. Why not? Except today, because there's one actually going on today and I have a meeting. And I've gone to like almost every one so far. And my daughter was like, wait, you're not coming, Dad? And I'm like, no, I have a meeting. I'm really sorry. The teachers told us about this last minute. Or at least I found out about it last minute because I didn't look at the schedule for the holiday camp that she's on. And so I'm not going. And I feel bad about it. And she feels sad about it. I don't know why I'm on this tangent. Let's carry on. Old friends and neighbours reckons that they'd never heard either parent raise their voice once at the kids. No, I raise my voice at my kids. Not often. But I'd be like, hey, stop that. And if there was any hint of any criticism at all, it's that Bart and Krista may have been a bit too soft with them. They were sometimes described as helicopter parents, constantly hovering over the pair to micromanage every situation and social interaction and new experience, whilst ensuring that nobody ended up with a nosebleed. I can't quite imagine managing to get through an entire childhood without a parent ever raising their voice. Some might suggest that Bart and Krista would have let their kids get away with... Oh, God. Daddy's just left a ... But it's like, yeah, get away with murder, Daddy. Oh, no. Well, it sounds like they were very soft indeed. By 2021, oldest brother Mitchell had flown the nest after securing a good job in the tech industry and setting up home with his fiancée. Meanwhile, 23-year-old Chandler was still living with his folks, but looked very much like he was going places, specifically to a SpaceX facility in Florida. Okay, well done, guys. In his later school years, Chandler had enjoyed a reputation as a bit of a prankster and a wind-up merchant, presumably after having eventually ducked out of sight of his helicopter parents for a period of longer than 5 minutes. But whilst he was known for poking fun at others and occasionally getting into perfectly natural mischief, Chandler never landed himself in serious trouble. And now he was all grown up, he liked to work hard and play hard. He was massively into video gaming, with a particular fascination for the PC multiplayer tactical first-person shooter Escape from Tarkov. I've heard of it, I've never played it. But he wasn't the type to stay indoors all day with the curtains drawn. The former Eagle Scout and gifted swimmer was also known for his love of the great outdoors, and he liked to think that he was a bit of a party animal and a big hit with the ladies. It sounds like this guy's got a pretty great life, to be honest. It seems to be going very well for him. By this time, he was in a long-term relationship with a young woman called Catherine Melander, who lived around 20 miles away with her mother, Dulce? Dulce? D-U-L-C-E? I've never heard of that name before. On a huge farm owned by her mother's girlfriends, Crescent Lasai. Her mother's girlfriends? Crescent. They've both got weird names. This is Crescent. And what was her name? Dulce. Okay. Catherine, more commonly known as Cat, had a warm and bubbly personality and was positively embraced by Chandler's parents, who always made her feel at home whenever she called round to visit or stayed over for the weekend. The relationship had a few nasty bumps along the way, largely down to Chandler still being keen to play the field behind Cat's back, but Cat felt hopeful that her boyfriend was now getting ready to settle down in a serious relationship, and she certainly featured very prominently in his exciting plans for the immediate future. A quick glance at Chandler Halderson's LinkedIn profile at the time would have shown you just how busy he'd been over the last few years. After qualifying as a swimming instructor and a lifeguard, Chandler was occasionally called upon to assist the local police force's scuba diving team. He'd recently completed a 2-year diploma in computer technology at Madison Area Technical College, during which time he'd picked up a good job at American Family Insurance on the side. He had been working remotely for the insurance firm, as this was during the height of the COVID pandemic, so he only ever had to commute as far as his own bedroom. God, it's so weird. That is such a weird thing to read, that I'm now doing casual criminalists referring to like the whole COVID thing in the past, like it's far enough back that we're now making episodes that occurred during it, which is, I don't know why it's weird, because obviously time moves on, but that was like COVID-19. It's now 24. But he certainly sounds a lot more motivated, ambitious, and dedicated than I was at his age. I had a bit of a life wobble at the age of 23, and my most cunning plan to raise fresh finance was to cut open my own sofa and armchairs with a pair of scissors to see if anyone had ever dropped any loose change down the sides, which might have got stuck inside the furniture. My friends and family told me I'd hit rock bottom at this point, but I was the one who had found a total of £6.41 down there, which may otherwise have been lost forever. So I felt that I was winning when I popped down to the shops to buy a packet of Lucky Strikes and a bottle of cheap white cider. And then you get to the next day, there's just an empty packet of Lucky Strikes and an empty bottle of white cider. You're like, oh, for fuck's sake. But there was no stopping Chandler Halderson. Elon Musk was after him now. Well, maybe not Elon Musk personally, but Chandler proudly announced that he'd just accepted a position working at a SpaceX facility in Florida. Wait, what was his job? What was his degree? Did he have a degree? 2-year diploma in computer technology. Okay. I wonder what he's going to be doing for SpaceX. This would obviously mean moving out of the family home in Wisconsin, but SpaceX had already sorted out a fancy new apartment for Chandler in Florida, along with a company car, and Kat had accepted his thrilling invitation to go and live with him as he embarked upon this bold new chapter in life. I get the feeling that Chandler here might be a little bit of a narcissist, and he hasn't got the job offer that he wants, so he's like, picks a cool company out of the air, like SpaceX, and is like, yeah, no, they're giving me a job in Florida in a great apartment. And none of this is true. Just wild speculation at this point. Yes, while all seemed peachy on the surface, a couple of things were troubling Chandler's dad, Bart. For starters, Chandler had never received any official documentation to prove that he'd graduated from Madison Area Technical College, and Bart was growing concerned that this might hamper his son's future career prospects. Let me guess, he hasn't been going to college. Ever keen to jump in and help, Bart contacted the college himself several times via telephone and email, but just seemed to get passed around from department to department for a while. However, he did receive confirmation that the documentation was definitely on the way after an unfortunate delay, and an appointment was eventually secured with the college so that he and Chandler could visit in person and finally get this thrashed out once and for all. Okay, so maybe you did graduate. I'm still skeptical. I'm still feeling a bit skeptical about that. In the meantime, something else was troubling Bart. Although Chandler was earning good money with his job working remotely for American Family Insurance, he didn't seem mad keen on the idea of paying any rent to his parents. I mean, well, that's on you, Dad. You got to bring it up. Bart, you got to be like, yo, Chandler, you got to start paying rent. And if Chandler says no, then you're like, well, you got to find somewhere else to live, Chandler. Is how it works. You got a job? Come on. I mean, my parents never charged me rent. I moved back home after university for a little while, and my parents didn't charge me rent. But if they'd have asked, I'd have been like, okay. And it later transpired that this was because Chandler had been plagued by a streak of bad luck, which had prevented him from even picking up his first payment. Firstly, he'd accidentally provided the company with the wrong bank details. Then the company had mistakenly classed him as an hourly worker rather than a salary worker, which had mucked up his payments. And when Chandler thought he was finally going to get back all the back pay that was owed him in one mighty lump sum, the bank flagged up the payment as fraudulent and blocked it on the grounds that the amount was far too large to be genuine. Happens to me all the time, and it's a proper pain in the arse. I don't think it's ever happened to me. And I get some fairly substantial payments on occasion, and it's just, I don't think my bank's ever been like, no, you can't receive the money. If there's any issue, they'll be like, you sure you want to send that? Are you like sending money? They'll be like, are you sure that's a lot? Are you sure you want to send that? And I'm like, yes. God damn it, but I'm glad you ask. Receiving money, the bank's always just like, we'll take that, thank you very much. Now, this may sound a bit fishy to the more cynical mind, indeed it does, Danny, but Bart had seen all the correspondence flying back and forth between Chandler, the insurance firm, and the bank, and he appeared to feel confident that the matter would be resolved sooner rather than later. But then Chandler was battered by another heavy pounding of freakish bad luck. The clumsy young man fell down a flight of stairs at the family home and hurt himself pretty badly. Nobody else was around at the time, so poor old Chandler had to drag himself to the local emergency room, where he was diagnosed with a serious concussion and sent back home in a neck brace. I get the feeling that old Chandler's got beaten up for some reason. I get the feeling Chandler is leading a very double life, and something mega sketchy is going on behind the scenes. For the next few weeks, he was wandering around in a daze while complaining of constant headaches, tingling pains, and dizzy spells. The doctor had strongly advised him to rest up and avoid driving or any kind of long-distance travel. Chandler also warned that he might even eventually require brain surgery. And this unwelcome turn of events was now casting a dark shadow on Chandler's career plans. How was he now supposed to start his new life working at SpaceX in Florida when he couldn't drive, travel, or even stay on his feet for more than 5 minutes without getting all lightheaded? That wasn't going to go down with Elon Musk at all. However, the events of July 2021 would conclude with an even more compelling reason why Chandler Halderson wouldn't be able to just hop on a plane to Florida anytime soon. Let me guess. Arrest. Cabin fever. On Friday, July the 2nd, Krista Halderson failed to show up for work at the automotive company. Her colleague and good friend Daniel Kroninger grew concerned about this. Krista was usually a reliable sort who was as punctual as a traffic warden, magically popping up next to your parked vehicle at the exact moment that your ticket has expired. If she'd been taken ill, then Daniel would have at least expected a family member to get in touch or something. He made a few calls to the Halderson residence throughout the working day, but received no answer. However, Daniel lived very close to the family, so he popped over to the house on his way home from work to check that everything was all right. Nobody answered the door at first, So Daniel went for an inquisitive mooch around the property, observing that both Bart and Krista's cars were still parked in the garage. As he later peered through the living room window and noticed that a small glass coffee table had been knocked on its side, perhaps indicating some kind of disturbance, somebody finally came to the door. It was Chandler Halderson, wrapped in a towel. He noticeably wasn't wearing his neck brace, but he was now sporting a big bandage on his bloodied foot. Chandler explained that he'd just got out of the shower and he'd had a bit of a tough day. He'd been playing ball with the 3 dogs inside the house earlier in the afternoon, but the game had spiraled out of control and the dogs had ended tipping over and smashing the coffee table and breaking the fireplace enclosure. Chandler had cut his foot on the broken glass while attempting to clean up the mess. Why are there always dogs involved in these kinds of stories? Danny, because Americans, they all have dogs, I think. I'm already beginning to wonder if they'll make it to the final chapter. Still, Chandler had some very reassuring news for Daniel Kroninger. His parents were absolutely fine. They just decided to take a spontaneous trip to the family cabin about 3 hours north of Windsor in Langlade County. The water pump and fire pit had become damaged in a recent storm, and so Bart and Krista had popped over to fix things and make a long weekend out of it with a couple of friends and plenty of crates of booze. This explains why both cars were still in the garage. Bart and Krista had been picked up by their friends at 5 a.m. that morning before Chandler had even climbed out of bed. Daniel was still puzzled as to why Krista had suddenly taken off for the weekend without informing anyone that she wouldn't be at work on the Friday. Yeah, it's a bit of a weak excuse. It's like, oh, no, I just popped off for a holiday. You've got a job. You can't just not show up. This was very much out of character. But Chandler assured Daniel that she'd be back in time for work on Monday morning before he hobbled back into the house on his tender foot. A couple of days later, on Sunday, Daniel Kroninger was hosting a small fireworks party at his house in honor of the 4th of July, and he was a little surprised to receive a call from Chandler inviting himself around as he was a bit bored and needed to do something. Daniel had tried to phone Krista's cell phone several times over the weekend with no answer, but as Chandler explained when he turned up at the party, the reception over at the cabin was pretty temperamental. Chandler did, however, bring an update of his own. He showed Daniel a text message from his mum which explained that she and Bart and their friends had decided to stay on to attend the 4th of July parade being held in White Lake that day. This would extend their stay a bit, but they were still likely to be back home either Monday night or maybe Tuesday at the very latest. I do hope then between getting through all of those crates of booze and attending all-day parades, at least one of them remembered to repair the water pump and the fire pit. Yes, because they're really there, Danny. They're not, they're dead. They're like speculating here, but come on, we know what happens. Daniel was still a little perplexed as to why the usually dependable Krista now seemed to be on the verge of taking off a total of 3 unscheduled days from work without bothering to contact anyone in the office. If I'd have behaved in a similar manner in the jobs I've held in the past, I probably would have just been fired by the time I casually rolled up on the Wednesday morning. Yeah, dude, of course you would be. It's like, where have you been? Like, I needed you. You have a job and a contract. You can't just not come and tell no one. However, Krista Halderson still hadn't casually rolled up for work by Wednesday morning, at which point Daniel Kroninger became increasingly worried and strongly urged Chandler to contact the police. Although Chandler still didn't seem overly concerned and felt that his parents had probably just decided to extend their trip even further, he reluctantly reported his parents as missing on Wednesday, July the 7th, 2021. Well, why doesn't he... The first step surely would be to just drive up to the cabin. Not call the police, just be like, why have you been to the cabin? Are they all right? You just drive the 3 hours to the cabin and check on them. This appears to be the first time that his older brother Mitchell had heard anything might be amiss, or indeed had heard that his parents had even gone to the family cabin in the first place. Upon hearing the news, Mitchell and his fiancée got straight in the car to make the 3-hour journey to the cabin in Langlade County, quite possibly wondering why on earth Chandler hadn't alerted them much earlier. Yeah, like a normal, sensible person, that's what you would do. You'd go up there and check on them. The couple were met at the cabin by Langlade County deputies, but what they all found there wasn't particularly helpful to anyone. The cabin was locked up, the grass was overgrown, a tree had fallen down near the driveway, and it was blindingly obvious that nobody at all had been there for several months. Unlike Chandler Halderson, the Dane County Sheriff's Office wasted no time in raising the alarm the following day and launching a public appeal for any information regarding the whereabouts of 50-year-old Bart Halderson and 53-year-old Krista Halderson, who now hadn't been seen since exactly a week ago. Even Chandler himself finally spurred into action as he began knocking on doors of his neighbors to ask if anyone had seen or heard from his parents during the last week. On the same day, he also agreed to give an interview to TV reporter Adam Duxter from the local TV station WKOW-TV. But it was on the condition that only his voice should be used in the report, as he was too shy to have his face shown on television. The recorded interview illustrates exactly why detectives weren't going to have much joy in getting anything remotely useful out of Chandler. While he appeared to be remarkably upbeat about the prospect of finding his parents safe and sound and indicated that he wasn't even entertaining thoughts of darker outcomes, he couldn't really come up with anything that was going to be of much help in the search. Here's a heavily condensed version of what he told Adam Duxter over the course of a somewhat rambling interview, and I know it's hard to believe that these are the best bits. Okay, let's see what he says. Their plan, to my knowledge, they were going to go to Langlade County to their cabin. They were picked up by their friends, who I never got the name of. I assumed it was someone I was aware of, like the close neighbors of theirs up the street or their best friends down on the east side, so that's what I assumed. I never really asked any further into it. They were out before 6 to beat the rush to get out to north. This has happened before, where they head out before I leave or I wake up. You know, I'm a heavy sleeper. I'm on a schedule. I wake up at 6 to feed the dogs. The last message I got from them was on Sunday. They were going to White Lake for the 4th of July. There's some festivities that go around there. Along the way, they could have stopped many places, but I wouldn't know all of them. They're maybe at a casino, their phone's off, no reception. Maybe they're on a boat, having some fun with their friends. Did you not? Okay. So in a nutshell, he doesn't know who drove his parents to the cabin, he doesn't know where they might have gone afterwards, but he suggests that they might be in a casino or maybe on a boat. The reporter may have been better off interviewing Mitchell or one of the dogs. But the detectives were now starting to grow more than a little suspicious about Chandler's vague story. For starters, there's the obvious point that Chandler was the only one claiming that his parents had gone to a cabin in Langlade County, which had clearly not been occupied for months. You could have speculated that they never arrived at their destination, but the text received from Krista on Sunday seemed to confirm that they had been there for a few days and they were moving on to the 4th of July parade in White Lake. There was another big problem right there, though. That year, the 4th of July parade in White Lake had actually been held a day earlier on the Saturday. Uh-oh. Chandler also seemed to be describing a completely different couple of people to the ones known by close friends and family. He suggested that Bart and Krista had packed a few crates of booze for the trip and might have ended up at the casino, and that raised several eyebrows as the couple very rarely drank at all, and a casino was one of the last places you'd expect to find them. So they're his parents. How is it? I feel like this would be like, if I described my parents that way, people would be like, you what? It's like my parents would go, they'd take like good food to barbecue and they'd be more likely to end up in a museum. By the end of the very same day that Chandler had given his interview to WKOW-TV, he was arrested on suspicion of providing false information on a missing person and obstructing a police investigation. But he didn't seem too fazed by this latest development. Up to that point, he hadn't really seemed fazed by anything and still didn't seem that worried about what might have happened to his missing parents. It seems like it just carried on as normal ever since Bart and Krista had left that Friday morning. Later that same Friday night, he'd invited his girlfriend Kat over to stay the night whilst the folks were away. Kat travelled back home to Cottage Grove very early on Saturday morning. This was the farm owned by Crescent Lasai, the partner of Kat's mother. Chandler joined her later in the evening for a pool party being held on the farm. As we already know, Chandler was at a bit of a loose end on the Sunday, which is why he ended up inviting himself over to Daniel Kroninger's fireworks display, whilst on Monday he'd gone back to Crescent Lasai's farm to enjoy a more private dip in the swimming pool. But all this time, he hadn't seemed too worried that his parents hadn't returned home, and his lack of concern seems apparent in the footage of his 2-hour questioning from the police held later on the night that he was arrested. He seems more interested in snagging off his dad's lousy green egg grills than trying to remember anything that might be important. In fact, his whole demeanor seems a bit off. He slouches around uncomfortably like he's ready for a nap. He takes forever to answer the simplest of questions, and he usually responds in slow, drawling tones, which drift off into complete irrelevance. What a strange situation. What a strange man. Some have suggested that Chandler may be using drugs at this point, a theory which has never been proven. But whatever the cause, this remarkably gaunt character does seem several worlds away from the highly motivated, hard-working, energetic and fun-seeking Eagle Scout that his old friends remembered. The vibes he gives off in the interview are of someone who really just fancies a cheese toastie but can't quite muster the strength to go and make one. Very little of value came to light during the main part of the police interview, but that's largely because the detectives didn't have the time to drill down into the specifics of their suspicions before something else unexpectedly came to light, which dramatically changed the tone of the interview. A report came in that a discovery had just been made. A dismembered human male torso had been found just around the corner from the farm at Cottage Grove. Is this the laziest murder ever? Really? Wrapped around your finger. Whilst we leave an initially oblivious Chandler Halderson hanging out in the police station for a while, it's worth rewinding a little to reflect on the fact that he was a proper lying little toe rag. He appeared to fib about pretty much everything, and not all of his porkies even made any kind of sense. Yeah, this was my vibe. I don't think he's got that job at SpaceX, right? You may remember that his LinkedIn page mentioned how he was occasionally called upon to assist the local police force's scuba diving team. That sounds pretty impressive, but the local police force didn't even have a scuba diving team. Still, I'm told that everybody lies on LinkedIn, just as everybody awards themselves a few extra qualifications on the job application form. You can usually get away with it, as barely any employer ever bothers to check. My advice to any younger viewers still considering frittering away the rest of their childhood in education in the hope of securing a well-paid job is to drop out immediately and just give yourself a stack of impressive fake qualifications on your CV. You're welcome. Yeah, look, I get plenty of CVs. Number I've checked. Actually, checked references, 0. 0. You could say that you have a doctorate from MIT and I'll be like, sounds good, mate. I bet you do. And I'd believe you. Please don't do that. However, Chandler's lies ran much deeper than just a few false claims on LinkedIn. That job waiting for him at SpaceX never existed at all. SpaceX had never heard of him. And this does make you wonder why he was painting himself into a corner with this one. After inviting Kat to join him in his new apartment in Florida, how could he possibly backtrack on this without looking a bit silly? Well, an unfortunate head injury might do the trick. Whilst we'll never know exactly what happened when Chandler was home alone that day, he did suffer a minor injury which may well have been caused by throwing himself down the stairs. Whilst he did indeed visit the emergency room, the doctor concluded that he was just suffering from a very mild concussion, and there was certainly no mention of brain surgery or even the need to avoid long-distance travel or driving. Chandler had tried to lay it on thick to the doctor and begged for a neck brace, which the doctor eventually gave him, while emphasizing that Chandler would almost have certainly no need for it. However, Chandler was already wearing the neck brace by the time he got back home, and was very rarely seen in public without it for the next few weeks, only taking it off when he wasn't expecting to bump into anyone that he knew. Rewinding a little further, that job at American Family Insurance never existed either, which explains why he never got paid for a job that he never did. Oh my god, I nailed all of this. None of it felt real, did it? Just excuse after excuse. And there's a good reason why he hadn't yet received his graduation papers from Madison Area Technical College, which proved that he had completed his 2-year course. Chandler hadn't even made it past the first semester before he flunked out of his studies. Hang on a second, though. Bart Halderson had seen for himself the email communications between Chandler and the insurance firm and had even spoken to the administrators from Madison Area Technical College via email and telephone, so how did that work? Either they're not competent or his dad's not competent, because Chandler, while he doesn't seem very competent at murder, so far, allegedly, or at actually getting jobs, he does seem quite competent at tricking people, and either his dad is just dumb enough, or just not dumb, but not technologically savvy enough to figure out when an email's legit or not, happens all the time. Boomers. Or the technical college is just I don't know. It's a college. It's just a mess. They're yeah, sure, he might have graduated. I don't know. Well, Chandler had obviously faked all the email correspondence, but he went way beyond just that. The faked email signatures contained telephone numbers, which Bart occasionally phoned himself to try and get to the bottom of his son's seemingly endless misfortune. However, each of the telephone numbers belonged to one of many burner phones which Chandler had acquired, so every time Bart thought he was talking to somebody from the college, he was actually talking to his own son, who assured him that his concerns were being investigated and that everything would eventually be sorted. Okay, so Chandler's really competent at tricking people. At this point, I'm beginning to wonder if it might just have been easier for Chandler to attend college or get a job when your determined efforts to avoid studies and work lead to a situation in which you're constantly composing fake emails, fielding tricky calls on burner phones, and throwing yourself down flights of stairs. You're surely approaching all of this wrong. It is very bizarre. Yet it seems as if Chandler had become so obsessed with the idea of staying at home all day and playing Escape from Tarkov that it never occurred to him just how difficult he was making life for himself. And his parents seemed none the wiser. They would leave for work every morning under the impression that Chandler was going to be spending the whole day working remotely for the insurance firm when he was actually just pizzing about on video games in his bedroom. You might be wondering why neither Bart nor Krista ever developed just the slightest whiff of suspicion that their son might not quite be telling the whole truth. Yeah, because you really want to believe your kids. Unless Chandler was particularly good at putting on silly voices, you'd have perhaps expected Bart to swiftly realize that he was talking to his own son on the phone. I mean, yeah, but phones are also bad quality. You could just be like, "Hello?" And you'd be like, "Hi, yeah, I'm looking for so-so." "Oh, yes, he's just stepped out of yours right now." You just put on a voice. It's not that difficult. "Hello?"
Mr. Madison's secretary here. Yes, putting you through.
And there were plenty of glaring mistakes to spot in the email correspondence that Chandler was sharing with his father. For example, an email from SpaceX confirming his new position misspells the name of the company. All the emails from American Family Insurance and the bank and the college were sent from generic Gmail addresses. Oh, come on now. And the surnames of the college administrators seemed to slightly change with every email, whilst one of those administrators had the quite unusual title of Human Resources Recourses Specialist. Human Resources. Okay. Why didn't Bart or Krista ever pick up on anything like this? Were they really so convinced that their amazing son would never dream of lying to them? Well, for starters, they had several other things on their mind at the time. Older brother Mitchell had recently been admitted to hospital suffering from undiagnosed diabetes, while Krista had recently been diagnosed with skin cancer. Okay, they got going on. Like, yeah, and he's their son. You'd just be like, okay, good, carry on. Yeah, we got this hospital appointment. They might not have been in the best frame of mind to get themselves too entangled in Chandler's web of deception. Having said that, it seems that Bart was indeed beginning to realize that his son had largely been talking it for the last year or two. Bart eventually decided to make another telephone call to the college, but this time he used a number that he found himself rather than one taken from Chandler's many faked emails. He got through to the very real enrollment coordinator by the name of Omar Job, but in an unusual move, Sneaky Bart had decided to pretend to be Chandler, chasing up his own documentation rather than just admit that he was Chandler's dad. Actually, Bart wasn't very good at being sneaky. A recording of the telephone conversation reveals that he slipped up a few times, occasionally referred to Chandler as he rather than I. Oh, Bart. It's possible that Omar quickly cottoned on what was going on here, but still played along with the charade to avoid inflicting any further embarrassment on Bart. But it's understandable why Bart may have become somewhat flummoxed, considering the revelations he was now absorbing for the first time. Omar told Bart that Chandler had dropped out of college very early on, that none of the names of the administrators he had supposedly spoken to previously matched the name of anyone working at the college. And to top it all off, Chandler still owed his college an outstanding tuition balance of $2,500. Just to top it all off, no! A shocked Bart ended the call briskly with the words, "Okay, that should do it then. Thanks for your help." Is this all recorded or something? Do they record phone calls like this? What happened next is a little unclear. Both Bart and Chandler were apparently invited to a meeting at Madison Area Technical College to get this sorted out, although we don't know for certain which one of them arranged this meeting. It's possible that Bart confronted his son with what he had discovered during his call with Omar Job. Chandler may have responded by angrily insisting that Omar had gotten it all wrong and then setting up a fake meeting at the college to temporarily appease his father. Alternatively, Bart may have played it cool and said nothing at all to his son, later setting up the meeting himself to see if Bart might come clean in the meantime. What we do know from Bart's calendar and his text messages is that he at least was fully expecting to attend a meeting at the college at 3 p.m. on July the 1st, 2021. He arrived home from work early on that day to pick up Bart, and it's believed that he stepped inside the house where Chandler was locked away in his bedroom, presumably still pretending to be working for the insurance firm. Possibly not wishing to barge in and disturb him, Bart sent his son a text message at 2:15 p.m. "I'm ready whenever you are." It would be the last text message that Bart Halderson would ever send. Oh no, the lies have all built up so intensely that now he's just going to murder his parents, which is insane. A couple of hours later, Chandler sent a text message to his mother, who was still at work. This one read, "Dad's phone died, text or call and get soda on your way home. I've got an extra hour of work." Krista Halderson's final text message was a cheery response that she would pick up the soda, followed by a smiley face. Security camera footage shows Krista arriving home at 5:12 p.m. and parking her car in the garage before entering the house, no doubt carrying the soda that her son had so politely demanded. She was never seen alive again. Back at the police station, Chandler Halderson was to find that the questioning from the detectives had suddenly become a little bit more intense, although he initially didn't understand why. They were like, "Well, we found a torso. Chandy, mate." They're just letting him cook. I like it. Detective William Hendrick advised him, "This is the only chance you're going to get to tell us the truth. If something happened, if you were defending yourself, or if you just got fed up with stuff, you need to tell us the truth. This is your chance to tell us why. I'm not bullshitting you. Bro, if the next word out of your mouth is not lawyer, 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 and only lawyer, then that's a mistake." Detective Brian Shunk pressed further. "We know more than you think we know. We have evidence. We have proof that more has happened. So your parents never made it to the cabin. And I think you know that." Chandler weakly shrugged and mumbled that his parents were okay. Detective Brian Shunk finally put it straight to him. "Chandler, we know your parents are no longer with us. And we know why. And we know you know this already. You were there. It's time to tell the truth. The interview was terminated shortly afterwards as Chandler Halderson demanded the presence of a lawyer. Oh my God, he really did? I mean, I don't want to be like, yeah, good job, Chandler, because he's allegedly, I think he's a bit of a murderer. But I mean, still fucking great call, mate. He never really spoke of what exactly happened that week. Shortly after Chandler had first been arrested, deputies had received a bit of a tip from none other than Crescent Lasai, the owner of the farm at Cottage Grove where Kat Melander lived. As we'll discover in more detail a little later on, Crescent Lasai reported that Chandler had been acting suspiciously on her property on Monday, July the 5th, and was spotted loitering around her barn and the surrounding woodline. This raised several alarm bells with deputies, who immediately raced to Cottage Grove with the intention of searching the whole area, and they had quite a bit of help in narrowing down the search once they arrived on the scene. A flock of turkey vultures was circling above a particular branch of woodlands from which a strong stench was emanating. It didn't take long before the deputies came across a male torso under a pile of branches dumped next to a Target shopping bag containing a bunch of bloodied rags. This is like the sloppiest cleanup I've ever seen. The heads, arms, and most of the legs were missing from the clothed torso, indicating that the body had been dismembered whilst it was still fully clothed. These remains were later identified as belonging to 50-year-old Bart Halderson. The autopsy concluded that Bart had died from multiple gunshot wounds in the back, including one that hit his spinal cord before his body was dismembered. No other complete parts of the body were ever recovered. However, several other items of interest were found stashed away in the woodland very close to the scene, including a tarp, a pair of scissors, a pair of pruning shears, and a broken saw blade, all of which were covered in blood and later matched that of Bart and Krista Halderson. But what of Krista Halderson? She was still nowhere to be found, and during these early days of the investigation, there was some speculation that she may have had a role to play in the murder of her husband. Even her inquisitive friend from work, Daniel Kroninger, was harboring some dark thoughts at the time. He later admitted, "It had definitely crossed my mind. You start to wonder, well, why is Chandler lying? Is he covering for himself, or is he covering for perhaps his mother? Is she involved?" 6 more days would pass before this particular mystery was at least partially solved. Well, when they get the blood analysis back and it turns out that it's both the parents' blood on there, well, we know what's gone on, don't we? But it's possible that any remains of Krista Halderson may never have been found at all if it wasn't for Snapchat. Oh, right, yes, Snapchat. I forgot about Snapchat. That's like that in the title of today's episode. Maps and legends. The popular multimedia instant messaging app, which apparently generates a total of 4 billion snaps sent every day, holy shit, although none by me as I'm over the age of 13, has certainly courted a fair number of controversies over some of its features since it was first launched in 2011. Snapchat's 13 years old, holy shit. One case that grabbed the headlines in 2016 involved a Snapchat speed filter, which allowed users to capture the speed of their vehicle and share the results with the platform. This immediately sparked concerns that it was encouraging reckless drivers to put their foot down just so they could look all cool and hard when they posted their dangerously high speeds on Snapchat. Don't do that. Don't post your crimes on Snapchat. Simple. And the concerns weren't entirely without foundation. 3 young men, coincidentally all from Wisconsin, lost their lives in 2016 when they clocked speeds of 123 miles an hour whilst using the feature before wrapping their car around a tree. Goddamn, 123 miles an hour is real fast. A similar case occurred a year earlier involving 3 young women from Philadelphia who were all killed. Siri, how fast is 250 kilometers an hour in miles per hour? 155.3 miles per hour. That's the fastest I've ever been. And no, I'm not boasting about my crimes. I was on the Autobahn where it's legal.
I live my life a quarter mile at a time.
It was really fast. Holy, that's fast. But it was an earlier story from Georgia in 2015 which appeared to result in the biggest ongoing legal repercussions for Snap Inc., even though it didn't involve any fatalities. 18-year-old Crystal McGee had a pregnant friend in her Mercedes C230 when she suddenly decided it might be a good laugh to switch on the Snapchat speed filter and rack up a mightily impressive high score. Despite her pregnant passenger pleading with her to slow down, McGee continued to floor it until she'd reached a speed of 107 miles per hour before crashing into another car being driven by a certain Wentworth Maynard. Neither Crystal McGee nor thankfully her panicked pregnant passenger was seriously hurt in the accident, which is pretty fucking remarkable. Going 107 miles per hour. Well, cars are quite incredible these days. And whilst McGee may not quite have reached the speeds that she was hoping to hit, she did at least seize the opportunity to enthrall her Snapchat followers by posting a new selfie showing off her minor cuts and bruises accompanied by the caption, "Lucky to be alive." I hope that Wentworth Maynard wasn't one of those followers, as he may not have entirely appreciated the post, particularly as he spent the next 5 weeks in intensive care being treated for traumatic brain injury. Fucking hell, poor dude. It's perhaps no surprise that Maynard went on to sue Crystal McGee for causing serious injury with her vehicle, and a charge to which McGee pled no contest. But he also took the step of suing Snapping on the grounds that they knew that the speed filter was being used in unlawful speed contests by morons, but did nothing to prevent it. I think that's a pretty good case right there. A Georgia court initially ruled that Snapping were under no obligation to prevent the consequences of deliberate misuse, noting that companies could potentially be crippled by the weight of being held responsible for every single accident caused by reckless misuse of a product or service. Yes, but when you are encouraging recklessness, that's a little different to just reckless use of a product that doesn't encourage recklessness, isn't it? But the story's not over yet, as the Georgia Supreme Court took up the case in 2022 after observing that intentional misuse should not necessarily protect a company from liability, and that manufacturers have a reasonable duty of care to reduce foreseeable risks. And this is definitely something that was foreseeable, in my opinion. It's an intriguing case with potentially game-changing implications, but as this case has already dragged on for years, I suspect we'll be waiting a while longer to hear the final outcome. One final interesting point here is that while Snapping has always denied any responsibility for the accidents and fatalities related to the speed filter feature, they later capped the top speed at which posts could be shared to 35 miles per hour before quietly dropping the feature altogether. The official reason was that nobody was using it anymore, which may well have been true after the speed was capped at 35 miles an hour. Yes, yeah. This kind of speaks, in my opinion, to the fact that this was foreseeable. Another controversial Snapchat feature is the Snap Map, which broadcasts your exact location in real time to everyone who follows you. This is obviously an opt-in feature, but concern grew over the fact that it wasn't initially made clear enough that the feature updates your location every single time you open the app, rather than just when you're actively taking snaps, as many may have presumed. Oh, this is how he gets busted, because he opens it, he's checking his Snapchat while murdering his parents? Oh, dude, what the You fucking psycho. Don't use Snapchat while you're committing crimes. What the f***? So on the face of it, this is a feature which could well have proved surprisingly useful for the often overlooked stalker community. I believe that the processes of the feature have since been made a lot clearer, although many are still worried how young users may be unwittingly putting themselves in danger by broadcasting their location to followers they may not necessarily know. Of course, it's also a feature which could prove very useful and potentially even life-saving for parents wishing to keep close tabs on their roaming children. But in the case of Kat Melander and Chandler Halderson, SnapMap proved to be more useful in allowing Kat to keep close tabs on her roaming boyfriend. It would appear that even though Kat was looking forward to setting up a new life with Chandler in Florida, she still had some serious trust issues with him based on their past experiences, and suspected that he might be hanging around with other women when they weren't together. But she hit upon a cunning solution to help put her mind at rest. She persuaded Chandler to allow her to track his every move on SnapMap. Spying on your boyfriend's movements at any given hour of the day doesn't exactly inspire thoughts of a perfectly healthy relationship, yet it seems that Chandler readily agreed to permanently share his location with Kat, possibly in a bid to prove that he had changed his ways and that he had nothing to hide. However, Kat noticed something quite unusual on the morning of Saturday the 3rd of July. Kat had stayed at Chandler's house the previous Friday night, whilst his folks were supposedly away at the family cabin in Langlade County. She had left very early on Saturday morning to head back to Cottage Grove, hoping that Chandler would accompany her. But he claimed that he had chores in the house to crack on with, so he told Kat that he'd join her at Cottage Grove later that evening for the pool party. This immediately made Kat a little suspicious. Chandler never did chores in the house. This was because Chandler was far too busy with his fake job, which meant that his parents still had to pick up the chores after they'd returned home from their real jobs. I mean, it's only fair. Chandler's such a douchebag, dude. Kat later checked Chandler's location on SnapMap at around 9 a.m. and raised a quizzical eyebrow when she saw that he wasn't at home doing chores at all. He was around 25 miles away on the banks of the Wisconsin River in Sauk County, close to a favorite swimming hole that Chandler often visited in the past. A photograph taken around a year earlier depicts a shirtless Chandler in broadly the same spot, trying to look all macho while clutching a large knife as if he's set to go hunting in the wild for his lunch. A puzzled Kat saved a screenshot of the map image to her phone to remind herself to question Chandler about it later, although it appears that she never got around to it. After Chandler was arrested the following Thursday, Kat Melander was interviewed by detectives who were keen to know if she had any suspicions that her boyfriend may have been involved in the disappearance of his parents. She insisted that Chandler would never dream of doing anything as crazy as murder his own parents, although her logic was a little off. She reckoned that he clearly loved his parents as they played Mario Kart together all the time, and she also pointed out that he would never do anything that might jeopardize his bright future at SpaceX. Oh no, Kat. I mean, it's not your fault. Why would you expect him to be full of such huge lies and capable of such heinous shit? I think generally starting from the assumption that people aren't capable of this sort of heinous shit is generally a good place to be. I mean, a person, statistically, obviously some people are, but let's just start with the assumption that most people would have murdered their parents. She did, however, agree to fully cooperate with the investigation and gave permission for her phone to be examined in the hope that this might help prove her boyfriend wasn't remotely shady. News for you, Kat. He is shady. The detectives quickly came across and saved the snap map image, which showed that Chandler was hanging around the banks of the Wisconsin State Lower Riverway early on that Saturday morning, and they naturally grew quite curious as to what exactly he had been doing there. They got their answer on the 14th of July when a full search of the area was conducted. It has to be said that most of Krista Halderson's remains are missing to this day. But investigators came across the victim's complete right leg and left foot hidden away in patches of riverbank. An official cause of death was impossible to ascertain from just a leg and a foot, but it would seem probable that she'd suffered a very similar fate to her husband. She was fatally shot with a rifle before her still-clothed body was dismembered and scattered around various wooded areas throughout southern Wisconsin. And had it not been for Snapchat, coupled with Kat's deep-rooted distrust of her own boyfriend, it's possible that investigators would have never recovered any of Krista Halderson's body at all. Chandler was eventually charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide, hiding a corpse, mutilating a corpse, and falsifying information about a missing person. But it took a little while for those charges to be filed, and in the meantime, his defense attorney, Catherine Dahl, was getting a little tetchy about how her client was still being detained without actually facing any charges. She noted, "We don't detain people without charges being filed. It's a sort of bedrock of what we do in the United States." Catherine Dahl also suggested that her client should be released back into the wild immediately without having to post bail. As she put it to the Dane County Court Commissioner, "He's a lifelong resident of Wisconsin, he's an Eagle Scout, there is no indication that he would flee whatsoever." Yeah, except the fact that he's just committed a double murder that he's on trial for is a pretty good reason to flee when you're looking at, well, going to prison forever. However, the clues were gradually beginning to pile up, which indicated that this particular Eagle Scout may well be more dangerous than he appeared, and that he would have had some explaining to do if he ever bothered to open his mouth again. Chandler's neighbors noted that his behavior was very odd on that night when he was knocking on doors to inquire if anyone had seen his mum and dad. Whilst it might have been assumed that Chandler was just putting on an act of worried son here to help deflect any suspicion, it may more likely be that he had an ulterior motive for his visits. The neighbors noted that he seemed more concerned about potential footage that may have been picked up by security cameras than anything else, and he was keen to borrow any such material. One neighbor revealed how Chandler became quite agitated and panicky when he was denied a request to check out the security camera footage as it had already been handed over to the police. You suspect that if Chandler had managed to get his hands on anything insightful, it would have been the last the neighbor ever saw of it. Yeah, but this is the future. You don't just oh, here's the footage. It's not going to be on a tape. It's going to be on the computer. You just stick in a pen drive and you copy it across. More clues were found in Chandler's somewhat alarming internet history on his laptop. Shortly after his parents disappeared, Chandler spent a while performing Google searches for several different variations on such terms as body found Wisconsin, women's body found in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin dismembered body found. Oh my good lord. How are you not using an incognito browser on a VPN? I don't understand. This was long before any remains of Bart and Krista Halderson were found, and before they were even officially reported missing. If Chandler had been smart, maybe he should have set up a Google alert here so they'd be notified as soon as any news began emerging of dismembered body parts showing up in his home state. Or just don't do that at all. But he clearly wasn't going to spend too much time fretting about it. Within just a couple of hours of searching for those terms, he changed his focus to search for where the messenger hides the item in Tarkov. Oh my god, this guy's a psycho. So it would seem that after spending a short time checking that his parents had not yet been discovered, he felt relaxed enough to settle down for another long late-night session on Escape from Tarkov. A few items of interest were later located in the garage of the Halderson home, namely Bart and Krista's driving licenses and mobile phones, which had been wrapped in tinfoil and hidden in a pair of shoes. Of course, Krista's phone still contained what was meant to be a last known communication to Chandler from Langlade County, explaining that they were extending their trip away, but it now seems far more likely that her last genuine text message had been sent several days earlier when she happily agreed to fetch Chandler a soda on her way home from work. Then there was the rifle. It transpired that Chandler had recently acquired a Russian SKS rifle from a former US Army soldier by the name of Andrew Smith, who regularly played Escape from Tarkov online with Chandler. Andrew had a pretty hefty collection of guns, but he didn't particularly like this one, and he thought that Chandler might appreciate it as a gift, along with 480 rounds of ammunition, largely because it was Chandler's fictional weapon of choice on Escape from Tarkov. What a lovely gift. It's likely that Chandler never bothered to tell his parents about this gift, but Andrew had no reason to suspect that giving the rifle to Chandler may have been a terrible idea. I mean, giving a rifle to anyone's a terrible idea. Don't give people rifles. There's background checks and when you get a rifle for this reason. You need to, come on. Although Chandler probably could have got a rifle because he doesn't have any criminal record or anything, right? The transfer was legally documented. Oh, okay. And Andrew was under the impression that his mate was a decent kind of guy who had recently graduated from college, was now working remotely for an insurance firm, and would be heading off to Florida soon to start his new job at SpaceX. Yeah, not really the sort of guy who you'd expect to commit this kind of crime, except obviously it was all a lie. The rifle itself was nowhere to be found in the house after Chandler's arrest, but detectives did come across a bullet casing for the weapon stashed away in the basement. It wasn't until a few months later that the actual rifle would show up again. Lasai Crescent was cleaning out her barn at Cottage Grove, the very same unlocked barn where Chandler had been loitering suspiciously after emerging from the wood line, when she came across a rifle that she didn't recognize stashed away behind pieces of wood. The barn had already been searched by deputies shortly after Bart's remains were discovered in the woods, but this hidden rifle, later confirmed to be the very same SKS rifle that Andrew Smith had gifted to Chandler Halderson, was initially missed. Meanwhile, a few more final grisly pieces of evidence were still waiting to be found within the Halderson home. Detectives discovered several blood deposits from the couple splashed all over the basement floor. And there was something else lurking in the fireplace. The same fireplace, which had been smashed to bits following a bizarre accident whilst playing with 3 dogs. Incidentally, you'll be relieved to hear that the 3 dogs were completely unhurt and went on to live with older brother Mitchell and his fiancée. Cheerio to all the viewers who are just hanging on to hear that bit. Although no more complete body parts of Bart or Krista were ever found, a total of 230 of their bone fragments, including fragments of their skulls and knee bones, were found mashed up amongst the soot in the ash trap of the broken fireplace. What a psycho. This wasn't looking good for Chandler Halderson. It's putting it mildly, Danny. He's going to prison forever. Our master's defense attorney, Catherine Dahl, had initially urged the county court to release a clearly trustworthy Eagle Scout client without the need to post any bail. He was ultimately detained at Dane County Jail and bail set at $1 million until his trial in January 2022. The only 2 people in the world who may even have considered attempting to try and get that amount of bail money together for the defendant were the very same 2 people he was now accused of murdering. The trial of the Eagle Scout. Chandler Halderson would plead not guilty to all charges during a trial held at Dane County Court, which would run for almost 8 weeks. The trial was live streamed over several media outlets, although this upset a few stomachs when graphic images of Bart Halderson's torso were projected onto the courtroom screen and broadcast live without much in the way of prior warning. That's a bit much. Have you guys seen that clip? It's so intense, where generally, as far as I understand, in news broadcasts, even when it's live, they have a few seconds where it's going through a control room before being broadcast. And then if they're doing something live and something goes horribly wrong, then the producer in the control room can be like, cut, cut the broadcast. And they'll go to break or whatever, and then they'll get their composure back and be like, okay, let's carry on. There's that one clip where obviously it's broken and they're following a car chase or whatever. And the dude gets cornered by the police and he gets out of his car and he starts running and he's got a gun and he shoots himself, kills himself just straight up. And it's on live TV. And it cuts back to the newsroom and the presenter's just shouting, cut it. And it's obviously that wasn't supposed to go live. He's just shouting to them to be dude, don't let this get on the air. But obviously their lag system hadn't worked. And so all of this got broadcast. And then it eventually cuts. I'm probably misremembering this horribly, but eventually it cuts and he's we're really sorry about that. It's holy shit. But how about we don't broadcast that live on TV? And how about we don't broadcast people's torsos? I mean, in the courtroom, of course, it's evidence. I'm sorry, jury and lawyers and judges and everybody and anyone who's sitting in court, but that's what you're getting into. But the people viewing at home, Not so much. Judge John D. Hyland also had to sternly remind the media not to record or broadcast any footage taken when the jury was out of the courtroom, a directive which had earlier been accidentally violated by the Law and Crime Network. It's all very weird. How about just no cameras in courtrooms? Might be a good idea, America? No? But for anyone who found themselves at a bit of a loose end for 8 consecutive weeks from January 2022, tuning into the full live streams would certainly have unveiled an intensely fascinating trial, even if it was one almost entirely dominated in every sense by the prosecution led by Dane County Deputy District Attorney William Brown. In his opening statements, Brown spent over an hour outlining in detail the specifics of the charges brought against the defendant. He declared, Chandler Halderson killed his parents on July 1st, 2021. He cut up their bodies with axes and saws and knives, and he didn't even give them the dignity of having a funeral or even a final resting place in one piece or another. Their remains were scattered across Dane County, in public lands, on farms, in garbage cans, in rivers, and perhaps every ditch is a possibility in this county. Solving this case was like putting a jigsaw together, and Halderson had 8 days to spread that puzzle all over Wisconsin. Holy dark lawyer. Why do you have to use the puzzle analogy? It's super weird, dude. You're talking about people's bodies. In contrast, the opening words from the defense, led by Dane County Public Defender Catherine Dahl, was a blink and you'll miss it moment. She had already entered the not guilty verdict on behalf of Chandler, who appeared to have lost his tongue throughout the entire course of the trial. Also, fair enough. As I understand it, they don't often put the person, the defendant, on the stand because they could be ripped apart by the prosecution. It wasn't a very promising sign that Dora mispronounced her own client's surname several times throughout her opening statement. While she conceded to the court that her client may have been guilty of telling a few porkies from time to time, she insisted that this didn't necessarily mean that he was guilty of murder. No, all of the other stuff indicates that. Describing Charlie Chandler, or whatever his bloody name was, as a perfectly normal kid who enjoyed video games, swimming, playing with the family dogs, and chilling out with his girlfriend, she told the jury, "It is never going to be explained to you how lying turns into murder. What evidence do you have of murder?" Well, over to the prosecution. William Brown spent several weeks taking the jury on a complete journey through the events as pieced together by investigators, wheeling out hundreds of pieces of evidence as they plotted Chandler's movements on an animated map and called upon 220 witnesses to take the stand. What evidence do you have of murder? It was first established that Chandler Halderson had been lying to... Now I'm wondering if I'm pronouncing Halderson correctly. Did she say Henderson or something? I don't know, but Halderson doesn't seem that complicated to pronounce. Had been lying to his parents, his girlfriend, and pretty much anyone else who would listen about his college qualifications and his make-believe jobs. Representatives from Madison Area Technical College and American Family Insurance gave testimony to confirm respectively that Chandler had dropped out of college and had never worked at the insurance firm, whilst all the faked email correspondence and telephone calls had never involved anyone from either organization, aside from one genuine call that Bart managed to make to Omar Job. William Brown observed, "Having a fake job solves a lot of riddles in your life. No one's hassling you to get a new job. No one's hassling you to do chores all day. And the best way out of your pretend job is an even more pretend job. He's going to be an astronaut." God, this is a bit... William Brown, fucking legend, dude. I mean, other than the jigsaw comments. Brown was just making a little quip about the actual job description, which was always a little vague, but unsurprisingly, SpaceX also confirmed that they'd never heard of Chandler Halderson. After testimony from a local emergency room physician exposed that Chandler had massively over-exaggerated a case of mild concussion from a supposed fall, the prosecution turned its attention to the events of Thursday, July the 1st. Mild concussion feels like something you could very easily fake with a quick Google search. Even non-mild concussion, I feel like you could fake. It's unless they're sticking you in an MRI machine. I mean, maybe they're doing that light shining in your eyes thing for the pupil dilation or whatever. I don't know. Chandler's elaborately constructed web of lies was now on the brink of being blown wide open as his father arrived home at 2:15 p.m. to drive his son to the college meeting. His options were now limited. I mean, yeah, but one of those options should not be murder your family. Chandler, come on now, you idiot. The most natural course of action here would have been to finally confess that he had been telling fibs about college and work and face the consequences of his long-running deception. Yes, that's probably the best option. Other options, I don't know, other than kill you, run away, start a new life somewhere else, flee to Mexico. Dude, there's lots of options for you. You haven't murdered anyone yet. But Chandler Halderson didn't quite see it that way. Bearing in mind what we already know about Bart and Krista and how they were with their children, I suspect that the consequences would have been exceedingly minor and may have amounted to little more than cancelling that night's planned Chinese takeaway. Even the prosecution took time to note that the only potential criticism that could be levelled at the parents is that they doted on their children way too much. Perhaps Chandler simply couldn't cope with the feeling of embarrassment and shame of owning up to his lies. But the course of action that he took to resolve a relatively small fry problem in the grand scheme of things can only be described as utterly monstrous. Footage taken from the security cameras of neighbours, the kind of material that Chandler later seemed very keen to borrow during his supposed appeals for help. Yeah, like, I have the one copy. Go on now. It's probably uploaded to the cloud. We're in the 2020s. Shows Bart Halderson arriving home from work at 2:15 p.m. and entering the house for the last time. The same footage reveals that he was never seen leaving the house again. After Bart sent his final text to say that he was ready to go, Chandler approached Bart from behind the Russian SKS rifle and fatally shot his father in the back multiple times. Chandler's old friend, Andrew Smith, was in court and appeared to get a little grouchy when questioned by the prosecution over how many guns he had sold in the past, responding with, "That's none of your business, frankly." I suppose, well, yeah, you are entitled to plead the fifth, right? To not incriminate yourself. And maybe that's what he's doing, but couldn't just say, "I plead the fifth." Like, surely. The former US Army soldier may have had a point there, but he was clearly uncomfortable about the fact that the rifle he had gifted Chandler had been subsequently used by the recipient as a murder weapon. Yeah, not surprisingly. This guy doesn't seem like he knew anything about this, and I don't think he'd have gifted Chandler a gun if he thought he was going to murder anyone. Smith did explain that he just felt Chandler would have appreciated a real version of the rifle that he regularly used on escape from Tarkov, and revealed that Chandler had a big smile on his face when the weapon was handed over, along with 480 rounds of ammunition. And again, this was all registered. This was all legal. After killing his father, Chandler sent a text to his mother asking her to fetch soda on her way home from work. When Krista Halderson dutifully returned home from work with the soda, Chandler fatally shot his mother with a rifle. Then he started considering how he was going to dispose of the bodies of his parents. His first plan was to burn them in the fireplace, and this would obviously require a stomach-churning session of preparation in order to fit the dismembered pieces into such a relatively small area. Chandler used a saw, a pair of scissors, kitchen knives, a pair of gardening shears, an axe, and pretty much anything else he could find in the house to completely dismember his parents. This must have taken quite a while, as he didn't get the fire going until the early hours of the next morning. The jury were shown chilling footage taken from the security cameras at around 3 a.m, showing the light from flames flickering through the living room window of the Halderson residence, which suddenly began burning with fierce intensity, as if a fire was now raging out of control. Holy... The only thing more creepy than that would just be like black smoke coming out of the chimney on the top of the house, just like in the early hours of the morning. It's just like, oh. Also, like, human bodies are mostly water. That's going to take an awful lot of burning. A neighbor testified in court that around the same time, a curious smell was permeating the neighborhood, which was not unlike the smell you might get from barbecuing a large piece of pork. Oh, Danny, I didn't need to know. I remember when BSE was a thing when I was a kid. That, the brain, mad cow disease. Thank you, brain. Maybe I've got mad cow disease. Christ, I hope not. Mad cow disease is truly terrifying. Prion diseases, truly terrifying. I made a video about those years ago, and I think about prion diseases, and I'm like, oh my god, you don't want that. But yeah, the whole I grew up in the countryside, and the whole countryside just smelled of burning cows, like just barbecue, because they were burning all the cows because they had BSE. Or they thought they might have BSE. It was weird. It was a weird time. Chandler eventually realized that his plan wasn't going to work, as the body parts were never going to incinerate quickly enough from the heat of the fireplace, despite his efforts to speed up the process with a fan. He also hadn't accounted for all of the fat, which was now dripping from the body parts and creating something of a potential fire hazard. The explosive blaze shattered the fireplace screen and scorched most of the fireplace exterior as it threatened to engulf the entire living room. Chandler somehow managed to get it under control, although the glass coffee table was smashed in the process, causing him to cut his foot quite badly on the shattered fragments. After he'd finally put out the blaze, he shifted all the body parts into the basement and considered his next move. Before retiring to bed, he composed himself a to-do list on the Notes app of his phone, which included a shopping list of cleaning materials that he needed to purchase, and concluded with words, "Get a job." Dude, this is fucked up. I mean, in one way, he's obeying the rules of crime, which I got a little notebook here. Is one of them, if number 22, if the car has blood in it, don't clean it, just set it on fire. And setting it on fire is usually excellent advice for criminals. Don't like try and dispose of things, just set them on fire. But in this case, it's a whole body that you're trying to burn in a fireplace. It's not going to work, but not bad for trying, you know? Probably the right move to burn it. And then he's like violating rule number 1, don't write down your crimes, especially in like a digital thing. What are you doing? It was a message he should have maybe composed to himself a couple of years earlier, as it might have eliminated the need to buy cleaning materials. Yes, but alas, he doesn't have a time machine. He recently made an episode where some guy was like Googling, how do I make a time machine? Because he regretted his crimes so much. Oh, dude, it's horrible. It was so horrible. After what had been a long day and night, he was most likely still in bed when Daniel Kroninger first called around that Friday evening to inquire about Krista, who had been unexpectedly absent from work. At some point in the day, he'd popped over to the shops to buy a tarp and 20 pounds of ice, the latter of which was presumably intended to slow down the decomposition of the body parts. But he was certainly up for visitors by the time evening swung around, as he invited Kat over to spend the night, while his parents were supposedly away. He had a couple of requests, though. He asked if he could borrow her mum's Swifter wet jet mop, and also asked Kat to pick up some hydrogen peroxide on the way, as he had some cleaning chores to attend to on Saturday morning. I mean, if you don't suspect him of being a murderer, just a regular dude, you'd be like, yeah, okay. Of course you would. It might seem a bit odd that he invited his girlfriend over to a house still stained in blood, particularly as the decomposing body parts of his parents were still stored literally a few feet away from where they slept. Kat did inquire about the strange smells in the house, which Chandler explained was down to a combination of the broken fireplace enclosure and the fact that his dad had fired up one of his infamous green egg grills that morning. Meanwhile, all the blood stains were just the result of Chandler cutting his foot on the broken glass table. Dude. Kat had been more suspicious about Chandler's claims that he was doing housework the following Saturday morning as she headed to Cottage Grove. You're like, Chandler, you don't do any housework. You've got that really important insurance job which keeps you busy all the time. And by insurance job, she means playing Return from Tarkov or whatever. To be fair, he wasn't completely lying about having a list of chores to attend to that day, although they wouldn't have been the kind of chores that Kat was imagining. After spending a little time on cleaning up the living room, Chandler headed over to his favorite swimming hole on the banks of the Wisconsin State Lower Riverway, as evidenced by the image that Kat had taken when she was checking out his real-time location on Snapchat. After the original plan of burning the remains in the fireplace had spectacularly failed, Chandler had decided instead to hide what he could across the Dane County countryside. It's possible that Chandler scattered several different body parts somewhere around this area, although the only ones found here were Krista Halderson's right leg and foot. He later spent the evening enjoying himself at the pool party at Cottage Grove, where at some point he asked Kat if he might be allowed to come back and use the swimming pool on Monday morning, even though Kat wouldn't be home at the time. Kat asked her mother Dulce for permission, who in turn asked her partner and owner of the farm, Crescent Lasai. Neither Dulce nor Crescent were mad keen on the idea and found it a bit odd that Chandler wanted to come to the farm alone, but they agreed as they felt that Chandler might be going through a bad time after his unfortunate tumble down the stairs, which may have cost him his job at SpaceX. Oh my god, there's a web of lies, my dude. Chandler appeared to have a bit of a rest day on Sunday. Dude. If you've committed crimes, don't take a day off. This is a really bad time to take a day off. He attended Daniel Kroninger's fireworks party, where he showed the host a text message from his mother's phone, which Chandler had composed himself before later wrapping the phones of both victims in tinfoil and hiding them in a shoebox in the garage. Does wrapping a phone in tinfoil really stop it from getting any reception? Early on Monday morning, Crescent Lasai was beginning to feel a little miffed. Although she had generously offered the private use of her swimming pool to Chandler, there were no signs of him on the day. She quite fancied enjoying a nice dip herself that sweltering summer morning, but she wanted to wait until Chandler had buggered off out of the way, as she liked to go topless in the pool and didn't want her partner's daughter's boyfriend copping an eyeful. Or, I don't know, how about you just put on a swimming costume for that one time? She eventually figured that he'd changed his mind, so she decided to use the pool anyway, but before she hopped in, she spotted Chandler's father's Subaru backed up to the barn in the distance with the hatch open, whilst Chandler himself was emerging from the wood line. Dude, why? Why do it here? And why not do it at night? A neighbor later confirmed that Chandler had been loitering suspiciously around the area for some time, but had been nowhere near the pool, which had remained untouched all morning. When Crescent approached Chandler, She found him to be quite despondent as he mumbled incoherently about how he was suffering badly with his head pains today. She began to wonder if he'd come up to the barn to indulge in a drug habit that he may have developed following his recent misfortune. Not unreasonable speculation, a bit weird that he'd come out all the way to a barn at someone else's house to take drugs, but okay. Probably a more realistic thing in people's minds than, oh no, he murdered his parents and he's burying their bodies in the woods by my house, because that would be even more insane. But she didn't think much of it at the time, other than her partner's boyfriend might just be dating a bit of a weirdo, and she'd had enough of being messed about when she could have been enjoying the pool all morning, so she left Chandler alone and finally got into her own swimming pool, where she was later joined by Kat's mother, Dolce. As the prosecutor William Brown pointed out to the jury, what neither Kat nor Dolce could have known is that Chandler Halderson had spent the morning scattering more evidence around the woods behind the barn, including the torso of his father. A target bag containing a load of bloodied rags was found near the torso and contained another clue. A sticker on the bag bore the date of the 2nd of July alongside the name C. Melender. This had been the bag for a pickup order which Kat Melender had placed at Target when Chandler had asked to fetch some hydrogen peroxide on the way down to the Halderson house. The bag had been left behind in the house when Kat left home the following morning. He discarded several other items nearby, including the cutting tools that he had used to cut up the bodies and the tarp which he'd bought from the store on Saturday, all of which were covered in blood, which matched the DNA of Bart and Krista Halderson. The jury was also given evidence from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, which confirmed that strips of duct tape attached to the tarp were covered in Chandler Halderson's fingerprints. Chandler then decided to stash the rifle away in the barn, where it remained undetected for 3 months, at some point getting disturbed by the very owner of the barn, who was wondering why he wasn't in the pool. Both Crescent Lasai and Dulce Melender testified in court that they were even more annoyed after they'd got in the pool, as they later spotted Chandler making his way towards them, having finally decided that he quite fancied a dip after all. Dulce attempted to politely explain that it was no longer a good idea, as Crescent was now topless and the situation felt uncomfortable. Chandler completely ignored her and jumped in anyway. Dude, it's... the entitlement of that shit's pretty wild. It's like, it's not your pool, dude. It's these people's pool, and you're like, oh, whatever, I'm going swimming. If that were me, I'd be like, get the f*** out. What are you doing? Get the f*** out. You're not welcome. Rather than partake in a swim or converse with the others, Chandler just proceeded to splash water all over himself as if he was washing off in a bath before he quietly made an exit and loped back off to his dad's Subaru, leaving behind an utterly baffled and increasingly angry couple. As we know, Chandler reported his parents missing later in the week after only feeling pressured by Daniel Kroninger and was giving interviews to the local media before he was arrested on suspicion of providing false information on a missing person. It was only after they heard of Chandler's arrest that Crescent Lasai and Dulce Melender contacted the police to report his suspicious activities on the Monday, leading to the first grim discovery of Balt Halderson's torso, whilst Chandler was still happily telling the police that his light drinking and non-gambling parents were probably just blind drunk in a casino. It's such a bizarre thing to come up with. Like I said earlier, it appears if that was an excuse I used for my parents being away, who sound like Chandler's parents, like with the green egg cooking and all of this shit. It would be insane. I'd be like, oh, no, they're an art gallery, and then they're going to the theater after dinner. That's my parents, and that sounds like Chandler's parents. One of the prosecution's star witnesses was Kat Melender. A quick perusal of the dark corners of the internet, where armchair judge and juries are quick to reach conspiratorial conclusions, will reveal a theory that Kat Melender is not as innocent as she makes out to be, and that she may have been involved in or at least known about the murders of Bart and Krista Halderson. Is there any evidence to suggest that? I haven't seen anything so far. The theory goes that she can't have innocently spent the night in a house stuffed with decomposing body parts without sensing that something didn't quite smell right here. Except that happens all the time in these stories. The theorists insist that she had always been a collaborator in the long-running deception about his fake jobs, and she knew that the game was up for her boyfriend, so she helped Chandler to resolve the situation and only arrived at his house that Friday night to help assist in cleaning up the mess with her own Swiffer wet-jet mop and freshly purchased hydrogen peroxide. No, that seems extremely unlikely. Why would she? It's also been suggested that she plotted with Chandler on the follow-up plan to hide some of the body parts around her own home at Cottage Grove. Again, any evidence for that whatsoever. And it didn't go unnoticed that Kat continued to plead her boyfriend's innocence for most of the 6 months leading up to his trial whilst he was being held in jail. She regularly sent him encouraging letters, often packed with money or candy, but Chandler didn't always seem entirely grateful. Whilst he was promising that he would get out soon and raise enough money to support them both. Yeah, right. He was also very quick to get snarky with Kat. When she sent him a text message containing an abbreviation of the term "love you too," he got angry with her for not bothering to type it out in full. What a guy. What a fucking loser, dude. Kat did eventually have a change of heart over her boyfriend's innocence shortly before the trial, leading to some cynical souls concluding that she'd been persuaded to chuck Chandler under a bus to save her own skin. No, she just saw all of the evidence like we've done in this episode. We started being like, no way, free Chandler. And then you're like, oh, okay. Oh my. Really? No. Whoa. Yes. Oh, and then she changes her mind for completely fair. Poor Kat. But we should make it clear that this whole theory is absolute hogwash. There has never been a single scrap of evidence to suggest that Kat Malinga was in any way involved with the savage murders of Bart and Krista Halderson. No, but no doubt I will get an email just on my contact form on my website being like, Simon, actually, have you considered this? Blah, 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 linking to some like crazy Reddit post where someone's going off on one. I don't care. Like, please don't send those to me. I'm not going to change my mind. Danny has done the research. Danny knows what he's talking about. There doesn't seem to be any evidence for this, and I'm not looking to be persuaded otherwise by a conspiracy theorist. Thank you very much. Moving on. It might seem strange that she didn't pick up on the smell of decomposing flesh in the basement, but it usually takes at least 4 days for the smell to really intensify, and there would have been a stronger stench in the living room left behind from the fumes of the scorched fireplace, something which Kat did pick up on and questioned. More significantly, the couple's frequent text message conversations found on Kat's phone when she handed it over to the police leave no doubt that she was just as much in the dark as everyone else about his often bewildering behavior. She absolutely believed that he was working for American Family Insurance every day, and she was looking forward to their new life in Florida. She was also deeply concerned about Chandler's supposed serious concussion and regularly sent him supportive messages whenever he started whining about it and asking for help. And she absolutely believed that his parents had just gone to the family cabin in Langlade County, and she was later puzzled as to why the police seemed to be making such a fuss about it. Even when she later realized that his parents might be in some sort of trouble, she never considered for a second that Chandler might have something to do with it. As she told the court during a grueling 3 hours of testimony, "I just believed his parents were missing. I just wanted them to be found." The other 219 witnesses called by the prosecution included friends and neighbors of the family who confirmed that Chandler's depiction of a hard-drinking and hard-gambling couple was a million miles away from the Bart and Krista Halderson that everyone knew. Law enforcement officers and forensic experts were called to the stand to discuss the 230 human bone fragments which had been found in the fireplace, whilst forensic anthropologist Christina Figueroa Soto confirmed that the cutting tools picked up in the wood line were consistent with the characteristics of the cuts to Bart's torso and Krista's leg, even if they weren't necessarily a 100% match. I'm not sure we need to worry too much about a 100% match, though. The weight of the hundreds of pieces of physical and digital evidence against Chandler Halderson was frankly enormous and included Chandler's own phone data linking him to the locations where the victims were found. Well, again, just going back to that. Oh, show me evidence of murder. It's like, well, here you go. Plenty of it. And the fingerprints of Chandler were found all over the weapons and tools used in the murders and dismemberment. It sounds as if the defense team were going to have their work cut out for them on this one. Yeah, they are. Now, you could be forgiven for wondering why the defense team even bothered to show up. I mean, they could have been doing something productive with those 8 weeks, like experimenting with green egg grill recipes. I'm so hungry. Whilst the prosecution called up a total of 220 witnesses, the defense team came up with precisely 0. They barely even bothered to cross-examine any of the witnesses for the prosecution and had very little of value to ask when they did. But in all honesty, it's not like they had anything to work with here. Their client had given them nothing at all and had refused to speak with them about the case other than to stick to his original stories, which had now been utterly destroyed by the prosecution. Dude, bro, you got to talk to your lawyers. Like, they're your guys. You can't like, shut up in court if they tell you to, but if they ask you questions, you got to answer those questions, because that's your chance. Otherwise, you're going away forever. In all likelihood, they probably knew that Chandler Halderson was guilty of all charges and were just going through the absolute bare minimum required to get it all over and done with, whilst avoiding the risk of doing anything too controversial and potentially cocking something up so badly that Chandler might get granted a retrial. Defense attorney Catherine Dorrell and assistant attorney Crystal Vera still took the time to try and argue that Chandler's motives could never be proved, as nobody knew how his parents would have reacted to the exposure of his lies. They also pointed out that Chandler may not necessarily have murdered his parents, but instead just made a remarkably poor decision in helping the real culprit to dismember and hide the bodies. Yeah. Who's the real culprit, though? In a brief closing statement, Crystal Vera decided to helpfully outline the job of the jury. She told them, "Your job is to listen to this evidence as jurors. Listen to the evidence from the perspective of a juror, not from the perspective of a story corroborator. Look for what's missing. Look for alternate explanations." No. Yeah, I feel like your job as the lawyer is to provide the alternate explanation that just squeaks through on reasonable doubt, which it seems like she hasn't done. So she's like, "Jury, do you have any idea what reasonable doubt could be? Because I got cool." I can't help feeling that look for an alternative explanation is something that the defense team should have been trying to do rather than the jury, but that's a bit late now. Yes, Danny, exactly. The closing statements of lead prosecutor William Brown simply reiterated that the weight of the evidence and sheer common bloody sense indicated that Chandler Halderson was guilty of the ultimate act of betrayal. It took 2 hours of deliberation for the Dane County jury to reach a unanimous verdict. Chandler Halderson was guilty of all charges, 2 counts each of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and providing false information about a missing person. Bro getting life in prison. No doubt. Do they have, where is this taking place? This is like in the north, I've totally forgotten. Northeast? Somewhere like that? They're not, they don't have that death penalty up there. They're not that yeehaw. But he's going to prison forever, right? Chandler Halderson showed no flicker of emotion during the verdict, and indeed had been staring blankly and silently down at his shoes throughout the whole trial. His brother Mitchell Halderson had kept a low profile through this whole barbaric saga, but his fiancée later made a victim impact statement shortly before the sentencing in March, in which she spoke of the loss of her future mother-in-law and father-in-law and expressed her fear for the rest of the Halderson family should Chandler ever be released from prison. The only family member to show Chandler any hint of kindness was his paternal grandmother, who revealed in court that she still loved him despite his actions, which she described as horrific. She asked the judge to consider the possibility of allowing Chandler to be released back into society at some point in the future, as she stressed that his parents wouldn't have wanted him to be in prison for the rest of his life. She felt that there was still a good chance that her grandson could emerge from prison as a rehabilitated man. This does appear to be an exceedingly generous attitude to display to the man who just murdered her son and daughter-in-law. Yeah. Chandler had initially hoped to duck out of appearing at the sentencing altogether, as the defense filed a motion and affidavit in which he gave up the right to be present. However, Judge John Hyland wasn't prepared to let them get away with it that easily. He denied Chandler's request to snub the sentencing, dismissing the idea as absurd and an affront to the public interest. The judge observed, quote, "The defendant has no right to simply skip court hearings that might be uncomfortable or to avoid fully being held responsible for his behavior. The criminal justice system does not serve at the pleasure of convicted murderers." You goddamn right, Judge. It may have been a different story here in the UK, where defendants are still not legally compelled to attend their own sentencing. This leads to such unfathomable situations as the Lucy Letby trial in 2023, in which the former British nurse found guilty of murdering 7 infants and the attempted murder of 8 other infants was allowed to get away with not attending her sentencing, where she would have been forced to face the devastated families of her many victims and hear their impact statements. Yeah, this should be a thing, right? There are now apparently mutterings of introducing new legislation in the UK which would compel defendants to attend their own sentencing, but whilst I wholeheartedly support the idea, I also feel it could potentially get a bit messy. Okay, yes, but this should be a little bit messy, maybe. Unless you bounce and gag a convicted criminal found of a heinous crime who really doesn't want to be there, there's always going to be the risk that they could just start spouting the most sickening and disturbing vitriol in the direction of the families of victims until they're removed from the court, which is, of course, what they wanted in the first place. So just gag them. Is that not wrong? Just gag them. Just put some duct tape over their mouth and make them listen. They're a convicted murderer. Who gives a... It's not cruel and unusual. Having said that, if they're going to behave like such a dick, Maybe binding and gagging them is the only thing that's going to make it work. Yes, Danny! They may as well even have their eyes prized open whilst we're at it, even though they might be venturing a bit too close into Clockwork Orange territory. No, that's fine. I mean, I don't even think the eyes open is necessary. They're not going to be able to close their ears, are they? However, there was thankfully no need for any of that during the sentencing of Chandler Halderson, who remained typically mute for most of the proceedings. But then took everyone by surprise when he finally broke his silence by accepting an invitation to speak. Holy, what's he going to say? So what did he have to say for himself? Was this his chance to finally express remorse for his barbaric actions? Or did he just want to have a pop at the judge and jury? I am genuinely curious what he would say. Well, neither. In what may be perceived as a dig as his own defense team, he wanted to reach out to better lawyers and have another go. He calmly stated, "Your Honor, I want to take this opportunity to state my intention to appeal my convictions. If there are any lawyers listening and willing to take on my appeal, please reach out to me. It's not that I do not have feelings. It's that I was warned not to show them due to the scrutiny of this case. Thank you." And that was it. There's no word yet on any appeal, but if he does ever manage to hook up with any lawyers, he might want to actually try and do some talking to the next lot. Yes, might be a good idea. Talk to your lawyers. As you may have already gathered from the discussion on a potential prison release, there's no death penalty in Wisconsin. Wisconsin. So the only question left was the length of Chandler Halderson's sentence and whether or not he may be granted parole at any time in the future as requested by his grandmother. Defense attorney Crystal Vera had also argued the case for a possibility of parole, pointing out that the now 24-year-old Chandler still had a lot of growing up and adulting to crack on with. But Judge Hyland made it very clear in his sentencing that release was never going to be on the cards, as Chandler Halderson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge explained, quoting him here, "I don't like telling his grandmother that I'm not able to give her the relief she's asking for out of love for her grandson." I mean, no, but she's also going to be dead. She's not living until he gets out of prison, that's for sure. I cannot do that. I cannot grant to Mr. Halderson the generosity of spirit and empathy that his grandmother has for him. I cannot conceive of a way to fulfill my duty to protect the public that I serve were I to perceive that at some point in time an individual who committed these crimes should be released back into that public. Judge Hyland's final remark was surprisingly brutal, but also bang on the money. He said, "I have to, for this sentencing, ensure that the only time Mr. Halderson comes back to the community is to have the privilege of a burial that he denied his parents." In other words, you'll get out when you're dead and not a moment before, Sonny. Holy yes. That wasn't quite the end of the story, though. In April 2023, Chandler Halderson was back in court again to hear that 2 of the convictions against him had been vacated. But there's no dramatic plot twist here. That was just a case of tidying up a minor cock-up from the previous year's trial. The 2 charges of hiding a corpse are considered to be lesser offences than mutilating a corpse, and the defendant should never have been found guilty of both. The jury should have only had the option of finding the defendant to be guilty of hiding the corpses if they found him not guilty of the more serious crime of mutilating the corpses. This vacation of the charges on procedural grounds doesn't make much difference to Chandler's future, and will have no impact on the length of his life sentence or his non-eligibility for parole. Excellent! But it's just something to bear in mind if you were ever at risk of publicly declaring that Chandler Halderson is guilty of hiding corpses. That would be an outrageous defamation of character. He's only guilty of providing false information about a missing person, murdering his parents, and dismembering. And thank you, Danny, for the legal heads up there. Glad we got that one cleared up. Fighting for the fantasy. That still leaves us with the burning question of how on earth any of this happened and what could drive a seemingly bright, outgoing and healthy young man raised by a loving family to suddenly murder his parents for the most frivolous of reasons. He got just down deep in that crazy rabbit hole, didn't he? As we've already established, it's not as if the exposure of his lies would have led to any terrible life-changing consequences, such as getting disowned or booted out of the family home. Friends and family of Bart and Krista have all indicated that they would have continued to support their son and found a way to move forward and get his life back on track. It's as if Chandler simply couldn't cope with the squirming embarrassment of being found out and somehow concluded that murder was his only way out of a socially awkward situation. Then there's the unproven suggestion that Chandler may have developed a nasty drug habit at around this time, which may have somewhat clouded his judgment. He certainly looked a lot healthier during the trial than he had during the police interrogation, leading some to speculate that he found it a bit hard to score in jail. I'm not sure about that, though. Some would argue that it's easier to score on the inside than it is on the outside. Another theory is that Chandler became utterly addicted to video games to the point where it took priority over any other trivial aspect of his life, such as getting a real job. Yeah, okay, fair. That can happen. I think that level of addiction does exist, but being so addicted that you then have to murder your parents to cover it up, there's no excuse. There is no excuse. His obsession with the first-person shooter Escape from Tarkov has certainly reignited the tired old argument that video games are entirely responsible for corrupting young people and turning them into murderers. And of course, it didn't pass without the comment that the rifle he used to shoot his parents was the exact same model he'd used to shoot his opponents in the game. Well, because that's the exact same model that he had access to. But he still had plenty of other stuff going on in his life, which would indicate that he didn't just play video games around the clock. He was generally considered to be quite a sporty, outgoing and popular character at school. Whilst he may have become a little more withdrawn in his later years, he still had a girlfriend and a wide social circle, and he enjoyed a good party. It just seems as if he lost much of his motivation as he hit his 20s and preferred the idea of spending the daytime hours mucking about on video games rather than going out to work or doing anything vaguely productive. I feel like the opposite happened to me. I used to not be very motivated, and then in my mid-20s just became super motivated and was like, okay, let's go. Life suddenly struck and you're like, oh yeah, okay. Less fussing about, more getting on with work. At the same time, he couldn't bear to be thought of as the sole slacker in a hard-working and high-achieving family. The Haldersons were hardly billionaires, but pretty much everyone on both sides of the family held good, respectable jobs, including his older brother Mitchell, who had recently secured a new position in an IT company. Yeah, it's also, my family's the same way. Everyone's pretty successful in their own ways, and you don't want to be the one slacker who's not doing anything. In contrast, after quietly dropping out of college, Chandler's career prospects were headed nowhere, and this felt disproportionately out of step with the rest of his family. It could be argued that the driving force behind shaping this whole double-life deception wasn't so much about protecting his desire to sit at home and feed an alleged video game addiction, but more a way of just shielding him from the shame of being labeled as the lazy underachiever. But one of the most baffling and contradictory things about his behavior is the sheer amount of effort that he put into creating a fictional life in comparison to his distinctly lackluster and half-hearted attempts at covering his tracks after the murders. I mean, yes, he could have perhaps put a little more thought into maintaining his fictional career. He could have settled on definitive surnames for all the personnel that he was conjuring up out of thin air, and a spell checker would have gone amiss when it came to typing out job titles and company names. If you're going to write yourself a fake email from SpaceX congratulating you on your new position, at least ensure that you've spelled SpaceX correctly. It's only 6 letters long. But even so, the fact that he acquired multiple burner phones to field any potential calls from his dad indicates that he was taking his fake jobs very seriously and was keen to hang on to them as long as possible. One of the oddest things about his strategy is that he didn't seem to spend too much time worrying about the long game. At some point, patience was going to run out. The long-delayed documentation from his college was never going to arrive. The salary from his job at American Family Insurance was never going to be paid into his bank account. And why even bother making up a job at SpaceX and promising your girlfriend an imminent new life in Florida when it's clearly never going to happen? This kind of thinking may have led to some desperate emergency measures, such as throwing himself down the stairs, but it does seem as if Chandler was only interested in getting through the following week undetected, rather than thinking about long-term consequences. But his behavior following the murders seems to suggest that he was either an utterly hopeless criminal or just quite incredibly lazy. The list of mind-bogglingly moronic actions just goes on and on. Why invite your girlfriend over to stay at your place when you've got decomposing bodies in the basement? Why leave bone fragments in the fire trap, the bullet casing in the basement, and the mobile phones of the victims in the garage? Why not check that a 4th of July parade is actually being held in White Lake on the day that your dead mother is claiming to attend it? Why dump some of the remains and cutting tools near a property so closely connected with your own girlfriend's? And why not even bother to remove the name tag from the target bag stuffed full of bloodied rags? And why take your cell phone with you on your secret body dumping expedition when you know that the data that can link you to the locations and that Snapchat is broadcasting your every move to the girlfriend that doesn't trust you 1 inch? It all just feels like the most low-energy attempt to get away with murder in history. It does, doesn't it? It's just like... it's so sloppy and also high effort at the same time somehow. He clearly wasn't stupid, though. It's possible he'd spent so much of his life getting away with and fooling everyone close to him for long periods that he genuinely didn't believe he would have to exert that much effort in successfully covering up the murders. I'm obviously not trying to imply that his parents brought this upon themselves by spoiling him and believing everything that ever came out of his mouth. No, that would be insane. You're usually allowed to trust and dote on your own children without fear of being subsequently murdered by them. I just thought about my kids murdering me. Why would I think this? But whilst Chandler himself is not stupid, I feel that his biggest problem was believing that everybody else in the world was stupid. Although he's often described as a psychopath, it could be argued that he displays more narcissistic qualities. Yeah, dude. I don't think this guy's necessarily a psychopath, but he is massively narcissistic. No doubt in my mind about that. I'm not a psychologist, but this bro is a narcissist, my dudes. He seemed convinced of his own ingenious abilities to construct a fantasy life which felt more acceptable to him than reality, while simultaneously feeling convinced that everyone else was far too dumb to ever catch him out. When the unthinkable happened, and his lies were on the brink of being exposed, his only thought was to continue protecting his fantasy life at any cost, even if that meant murdering his parents and hacking them to pieces in the family home. And he fully believed that he was smarter than the police, who would never be able to piece together the truth after he had so masterfully carried out his schemes to dispose of the evidence. Again, it's doubtful that he spent too much time thinking about the long-term picture and how exactly life was going to pan out after this. He just needed to avoid that meeting at the college and then figure out everything else later. It's perhaps just a little surprising that he made no attempt at all to concoct further fairy tales during his defense. It could have been the case that he was stunned into complete silence by the shock of actually being caught, or maybe he was just finally beginning to realize that he wasn't really the only living genius in a world of gullible idiots, as he has always assumed in the past. Chandler Halderson is currently serving his life sentence at the Dodge Correctional Institution in Walpen in Wisconsin. In many ways, it could be argued that he's now living the life he always dreamed of. He always wanted free lodgings and free meals without the responsibility of having to work or pay for anything. He's now got the complete package, and he doesn't even have to make up to maintain that lifestyle. No, but his lifestyle is pretty grim. He's in prison, and I'm guessing they're not letting him play Escape from Tarkov. Well played, Chandler Halderson. He truly did get everything he deserved. Having said that, I suspect that he doesn't get the chance to play Escape from Tarkov quite as much as he liked. Exactly. And the only other problem is that should he ever receive a future invitation from Mark Zuckerberg to take on the job as the new eclectic chairman at Meta, Chandler Halderson would have to politely decline the offer, as he's a little busy for a while. As outlined by Judge John Hyland, his next outdoor social appointment will be his own funeral, and I'm not predicting a big turnout. No, definitely not, and that's the end of today's episode. Grim one, wasn't it? Thanks for being here.